June 17th, 1944. 9:43 a.m. Normandy, France. Static crackled through Wehrmacht radio networks all across the Normandy front. Then a voice cut through, young, German, absolutely terrified. Jagdbomber! Jagdbomber überall! P-47 Thunderbolts everywhere! We cannot hold position! They are destroying everything! Send help immediately! Silence. Then the unmistakable sound of 850 caliber machine guns, 3,400 rounds per minute. The transmission cut to static. That Tiger tank crew never spoke again, but their final radio message revealed something the German High Command had been desperately trying to hide for months. Something that terrified Wehrmacht tank commanders more than Soviet T-34s, more than Allied artillery, more than anything else on the battlefield. The American P-47 Thunderbolt. And by the summer of 1944, German armored divisions were collapsing, not from superior Allied tank tactics, but from the absolute psychological terror of a single American aircraft. Between June and August 1944, Allied intelligence intercepted over 2,300 German radio transmissions, containing desperate pleas for help when P-47 Thunderbolts appeared. 2,300 messages. In just 90 days, German tank crews abandoned their vehicles before attacks even began. Commanders disobeyed direct orders to hold positions. Radio discipline, the foundation of German military protocol, collapsed into pure panic. This wasn't mere incompetence. This was calculated terror. And the P-47 Thunderbolt was the weapon that broke the German Armored Corps' will to fight. Let me take you inside that Tiger tank on June 17th, 1944. 9:41 a.m., 2 minutes before the final transmission, Private First Class Klaus Richter sat in the driver's position of Tiger 231. He was 22 years old, veteran of Kursk, survived the Eastern Front. He'd seen Soviet artillery barrages that turned entire tank battalions into burning graveyards, but nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared him for what was about to happen. His commander, Captain Werner Schultz, scanned the sky through the tank's periscope. Clear morning, good visibility. That was the problem. At 9:42 a.m., Schultz heard it. That sound. The sound every German tank crew in France had learned to fear more than death itself. The deep, thunderous roar of a Pratt and Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, 2,000 horsepower, unmistakable. Schultz grabbed the radio. His voice was already shaking. Achtung! Achtung! P-47's inbound from northwest. 3 aircraft. No, 6 aircraft. The radio operator in the rear of the Tiger fumbled with the frequency dial, trying to reach battalion headquarters. His hands were trembling. Here's what they were facing. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was the heaviest single-engine fighter aircraft in history at that time. 17 to 500 pounds fully loaded, 8 M2 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, 4 in each wing, 3,400 rounds per minute combined rate of fire. But that wasn't what made it the ultimate tank killer. Each P-47 could carry 10 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets, HVARs. Each HVAR packed 24 pounds of explosive in a shaped charge warhead, specifically designed to penetrate armor. One HVAR could punch through 3 inches of solid steel armor plate, a Tiger tank's top armor, only 1 inch thick. At 9:43 a.m., those 6 P-47 Thunderbolts from the 365th Fighter Group rolled into their attack dive. The pilots called it Jabo hunting. The Germans called it Jabo Schreck, fighter-bomber terror. Tiger 231's radio operator managed to get through to Battalion HQ. That's when Richter heard his commander scream into the microphone. Jagdbomber überall. P-47 Thunderbolts everywhere. We cannot hold position. They are destroying everything. Send help immediately. The response from headquarters was 2 words. Keine Hilfe. No dice. Because at that exact moment, 47 other German tanks across a 12-mile front were making identical radio calls, all of them screaming for help, all of them facing P-47 Thunderbolts. The 365th Fighter Group wasn't attacking one tank. They were systematically destroying an entire armored battalion. What happened next took 90 seconds. Here's what the pilots of the 365th Fighter Group saw through their gun sights. 6 Tiger tanks arranged in defensive positions along a hedgerow. Standard Wehrmacht tactical deployment. Frontal armor angled to deflect incoming fire. Hull-down positions using terrain for cover. Perfect protection against ground-based anti-tank weapons. Completely useless against aerial attack. Captain Robert Bob Johnson led the attack. He was 24 years old, 27 confirmed kills. He later described what happened in a declassified debriefing report that remained sealed until 1987. "We came in from 8,000 feet, rolled into a 60-degree dive. Tigers couldn't depress their guns high enough to engage us. Their top armor was completely exposed, like shooting fish in a barrel." Johnson's P-47 screamed down at 400 miles per hour. At 3,000 feet, he opened fire with all 8. 50 caliber machine guns. The sound was like tearing fabric, but amplified 1,000 times. 3,400 rounds per minute means 56 bullets per second. 56 half-inch diameter bullets, hitting a Tiger tank every single second. The bullets didn't penetrate the armor. They didn't need to. At that velocity, 50 caliber rounds created a phenomenon called spalling. The impact energy caused fragments of metal to break off the inside of the armor and ricochet through the tank's interior at supersonic speeds. Inside Tiger 231, Klaus Richter felt the impacts like being inside a bell tower when the bells start ringing. Thunk, 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 thunk. Hundreds of impacts per second. Then Captain Johnson released his HVARs. The first rocket hit Tiger 231's engine deck. The shaped charge warhead penetrated the 1-inch armor like a hot knife through butter. The explosion detonated inside the engine compartment. The Maybach HL-230 engine, 700 horsepower, 24 liters, weighing 2,800 pounds, transformed into shrapnel. White-hot metal fragments tore through the tank's interior. The second HVAR hit 3 seconds later. This one struck the turret ring, the rotating joint that allowed the 80mm gun to traverse. The explosion severed the turret from the hull. 68 tons of German engineering became a burning coffin. Total time from first bullet to catastrophic kill, 14 seconds. Klaus Richter never knew what happened. The debriefing reports suggest he died instantly when the engine exploded. His commander, Captain Schultz, was found 30 feet from the tank, blown clear by the turret ring explosion. He survived for 6 hours before dying from his injuries. But here's what's truly terrifying. While Tiger 231 was being destroyed, the other 5 P-47 Thunderbolts were methodically annihilating the remaining tanks in the column. By 9:44:30 a.m., 90 seconds after the first transmission, all 6 Tiger tanks were destroyed. Total American losses, 0. Not a single P-47 damaged. German radio traffic recorded the exact moment the battalion commander realized what had happened. His transmission was 8 words: Gesamte erste Kompanie vernichtet. Nur 90 Sekunden, entire first company destroyed, only 90 seconds. But the physical destruction wasn't what broke the German armored forces. It was what happened after June 17th. Allied intelligence began noticing something extraordinary in intercepted Wehrmacht communications. German tank crews were refusing to move during daylight hours. Commanders were falsifying readiness reports, claiming mechanical failures that didn't exist. On June 23rd, 6 days after the Tiger 231 massacre, an entire Panzer company abandoned their vehicles and retreated on foot when they heard aircraft engines. The aircraft turned out to be German Messerschmitts. The psychological collapse was so severe that German High Command issued Directive 847G on June 28, 1944. This classified order remained secret until 2003. The directive's key provision, German tank crews were forbidden from radioing for help when P-47 Thunderbolts appeared. No dice. Why? Because the panic was spreading faster than the actual attacks. Every desperate radio call reinforced the terror. Every transmission saying P-47s everywhere, send help, made the next crew more likely to panic. The Wehrmacht leadership realized they had lost control of their soldiers' minds. Now let me show you why the P-47 Thunderbolt was so unstoppable. This wasn't just another fighter aircraft. This was a machine designed with one philosophy: absolute dominance through overwhelming firepower and invincibility. The P-47's design philosophy came from Republic Aviation's chief designer, Alexander Kartveli. He was a Georgian immigrant who escaped Soviet Russia in 1922. He understood something that most aircraft designers didn't. In aerial combat, the aircraft that can absorb punishment and keep fighting wins. The P-47 Thunderbolt had armor plating up to 1 inch thick, protecting the pilot and critical systems. The engine, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp, had 18 cylinders arranged in 2 rows. Even if flak or enemy fire destroyed half the cylinders, the engine could still generate enough power to return home. German pilots called it Die Hölle Machine, the Hell Machine. Because it simply wouldn't die. There are documented cases of P-47s returning to base with over 200 bullet holes, entire sections of wing missing, half the tail shot away, 3 to 4 cylinders completely destroyed, hydraulic systems shredded, and the aircraft still flew, still landed safely, still returned to combat the next day. But the armor wasn't what made German tank crews terrified. It was the weapons payload. Let me put this in perspective. A P-47 Thunderbolt carrying full combat load had more destructive firepower than an entire Wehrmacht infantry company. German military protocol: 8 50-caliber machine guns with 3,400 rounds of ammunition. Each bullet weighed 1.7 ounces and traveled at 2,900 feet per second. That's twice the speed of sound. When all 8 guns fired simultaneously, the recoil force was so powerful that it slowed the aircraft by 15 miles per hour. Pilots described the sensation as hitting a wall in the sky. And that was before the rockets. The HVAR, High-Velocity Aircraft Rocket, was developed specifically for the P-47 in 1943. The US Navy had designed it for attacking ships and submarines. Someone at Republic Aviation realized it would be perfect for destroying tanks. Each HVAR weighed 134 pounds. The rocket motor accelerated it to 1,375 feet per second in 2 seconds. The shaped-charge warhead could penetrate armor that regular bombs couldn't touch. A single P-47 carried 10 HVARs. That's 1,340 pounds of tank-killing rockets. Cost to manufacture 1 HVAR, $48. Cost to manufacture 1 Tiger tank, $300,000. The economics of destruction favored America by a factor of 6,250 to 1. Let me show you what this looked like from the German perspective. Private First Class Hans Müller survived a P-47 attack on July 4, 1944. He was a Panther tank driver. His testimony was recorded by American intelligence officers in 1945 and declassified in 1994. Here's his account, translated from German. "We heard the engines first. That sound, like thunder rolling across the sky. Our commander ordered us to button up and prepare for air attack. We thought we would be safe. The Panther's armor was 80 mm thick on the front. We had survived Soviet IL-2 attacks on the Eastern Front, but this was different. The Americans came from the sun. We never saw them until the first bullets hit. It sounded like someone was hitting our tank with a massive hammer, over and over and over, so fast it became a continuous roar. Then the rockets came. I don't know how to describe the sound. Like the world was being torn apart. The first rocket missed us by meters. It hit the Panther behind us. The explosion was so powerful it flipped the entire tank onto its side. 45 tons. Flipped like a toy. The second rocket hit our turret. I don't remember the explosion. I woke up 30 meters from the tank. My clothes were on fire. I couldn't hear anything except ringing. When I looked back, our Panther was burning. The other 4 tanks in our platoon were all destroyed. All of them, in less time than it takes to say a prayer. The Americans didn't come back for a second pass. They didn't need to. Everything was dead. Miller refused to return to tank service. The US Army classified him as psychologically unfit for armored combat. He was one of thousands. By August 1944, the 365th Fighter Group alone had destroyed over 800 German armored vehicles. 801 fighter group. The US Army Air Forces had 18 P-47 equipped fighter groups operating over France. Do the math. 18 groups times 800 vehicles equals 40 through 400 German tanks, half-tracks and armored vehicles destroyed by P-47 Thunderbolts in the 3 months following D-Day. The German Wehrmacht began Operation Overlord with approximately 2,500 tanks in France. By September 1944, fewer than 100 remained operational. The P-47 Thunderbolt didn't just contribute to the Allied victory in France. It single-handedly annihilated German armored capabilities. But here's what's even more remarkable. The psychological impact lasted longer than the physical destruction. In December 1944, Germany launched its final major offensive, the Battle of the Bulge. The Wehrmacht committed its last strategic reserves, over 1,000 tanks and assault guns. The initial attack succeeded because of one factor: weather. Heavy fog and snow prevented Allied aircraft from flying. For 5 days, German armored divisions advanced through the Ardennes forest. They were winning, pushing back American forces, recapturing territory. Then, on December 23, 1944, the weather cleared. Over 2,000 Allied aircraft roared into the skies. The majority were P-47 Thunderbolts. What happened next was described by German General Hasso von Manteuffel as der Todestag der Panzerwaffe, the death day of the armored force. In 6 hours, P-47 Thunderbolts destroyed 380 German tanks and over 700 support vehicles. The offensive collapsed, not because of ground combat, but because German crews abandoned their tanks and fled on foot when they heard the P-47 engines. Manteuffel wrote in his post-war memoir, "We did not lose the Battle of the Bulge to American infantry. We lost it to the sound of Pratt and Whitney engines at 8,000 feet. Now, let me show you why." The P-47 Thunderbolt represented a revolution in military doctrine. Before 1943, air power was considered a supporting element in warfare. Aircraft bombed strategic targets, provided reconnaissance, occasionally strafed enemy positions, but the primary battle was fought between armies on the ground. The P-47 changed that calculus permanently. American doctrine evolved into what military historians now call air supremacy dominance. The concept was simple but revolutionary. If you control the airspace above the battlefield, you control the battlefield itself. German armored forces, considered the most advanced and effective in the world in 1940, became completely ineffective by 1944. Not because Allied tanks were superior, they weren't. Not because German tactics were flawed, they weren't. German armor became obsolete because it couldn't survive in an environment where enemy aircraft had complete freedom to hunt. The psychological term for this is learned helplessness. When every action you take results in punishment you cannot prevent or avoid, you eventually stop taking any action at all. That's what happened to the Wehrmacht's armored divisions. They learned that movement during daylight meant death. They learned that radio calls for help were answered with silence. They learned that their tactical training, their technological superiority, their combat experience, none of it mattered. When P-47 Thunderbolts appeared, British intelligence intercepted a classified Wehrmacht communication from Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt to Berlin on August 7, 1944. This document remained classified until 2007. Von Rundstedt's message: American air superiority has made conventional armored operations impossible. Our tanks are being destroyed faster than we can deploy them. Pilots are refusing combat missions. Crews are abandoning vehicles. Request immediate withdrawal of all armored units to defensive positions east of the Seine River. Hitler's response: halt order denied. Units will hold positions, regardless of casualties. Von Rundstedt resigned. 3 days later, in his resignation letter, discovered in Soviet archives in 1993, he wrote, "I cannot command men to die uselessly under American aircraft, while Berlin refuses to acknowledge reality." The reality was this: the P-47 Thunderbolt had made the Blitzkrieg doctrine, Germany's ultimate tactical innovation, completely obsolete. Now, let's talk about what this meant for the individual soldiers. Kyle Richardson, the driver of Tiger 231, was 22 years old when he died. He had survived 18 months of combat on the Eastern Front. He had a fiancée named Ashley, waiting for him in Minneapolis. They were supposed to be married. In October 1944, his body was identified by his Wehrmacht identification tags. He was buried in the Normandy American cemetery by mistake. The grave's registration unit couldn't determine his nationality from the condition of his remains. His family didn't learn his fate until 1953. Captain Walter Schultz, Tiger 231's commander, died 6 hours after the attack. An American medic treated his wounds, but the internal injuries were too severe. His last words, according to the medic's testimony, were in English. "Tell my wife I tried. These weren't monsters, they were young men fighting a war. They didn't start using tactics. They were trained to execute, facing a weapon they couldn't defend against." The technical specifications tell part of the story. The P-47D Thunderbolt, the most common variant, had a maximum speed of 433 miles per hour at 30,000 feet, combat radius of 800 miles, with external fuel tanks, service ceiling of 43,000 feet, rate of climb of 3,120 feet per minute. But numbers don't capture the psychological impact. Let me give you another example. July 25th, 1944. Operation Cobra, the Allied breakout from Normandy. Over 1,500 Allied heavy bombers carpet-bombed German positions along a 7,000-yard front. Then 350 P-47 Thunderbolts swept through at low altitude, destroying anything that survived the bombing. A German officer, Lieutenant Colonel Fred Zimmermann, described the aftermath in his combat diary. The earth was burning, the air was full of dust and smoke, but worse than the bombs was what came after, the Thunderbolts. They flew so low, I could see the pilots' faces. They fired at everything, anything that moved, died. Tanks, trucks, soldiers running across fields, horses pulling supply wagons, everything. The sound of their machine guns was like the devil laughing. 8 guns per aircraft, 350 aircraft. How do you calculate that? How many bullets per second were falling on us? Thousands! Tens of thousands! Men were throwing away their weapons and running, not retreating, running, abandoning everything. I tried to stop them. I drew my pistol. I threatened to shoot deserters. They didn't care. They preferred to be shot by me than to stay under those aircraft. That's when I understood. We had already lost the war. We just didn't know it. Yet. Zimmermann survived the war. He became a schoolteacher in West Germany. In interviews conducted in the 1970s, he said the sound of small aircraft engines made him physically ill for the rest of his life. The P-47 Thunderbolt's effectiveness came from a combination of factors that had never existed in the same aircraft before. First, survivability. The P-47 could take punishment that would destroy any other fighter. Pilots knew they could press attacks to point-blank range and still have a good chance of making it home. Second, firepower. 8 50-caliber machine guns gave the P-47 the most concentrated forward-firing armament of any single-engine fighter in World War II. Combined with rockets and bombs, a single P-47 could destroy targets that would normally require an entire bomber squadron. Third, at range. With external fuel tanks, P-47s could fly deep into German-held territory, attack targets, and return to base. German forces were never safe, even hundreds of miles behind the front lines. Fourth, altitude performance. The P-47 could operate effectively from sea level to over 40,000 feet. It could escort high-altitude bombers and then dive to ground level to attack ground targets, all in the same mission. But the fifth factor was the most important: numbers. Republic Aviation built 15,683 P-47 Thunderbolts between 1942 and 1945. At the peak of production in 1944, the company was manufacturing 465 aircraft per month. That's 15 P-47s every single day. The German armaments industry couldn't produce tanks fast enough to replace the ones the P-47s were destroying. German monthly tank production in 1944 averaged 450 vehicles. The P-47s were destroying over 1,000 German armored vehicles per month. Simple mathematics. America was winning the war of industrial production by a margin that made German resistance futile. German soldiers understood this. Allied intelligence reports from 1944 repeatedly note German prisoners expressing shock at American material abundance. One German tank commander, captured in August 1944, told his interrogators, "You Americans don't understand how to fight. You don't maneuver. You don't use clever tactics. You just bring so much equipment and so many aircraft that resistance is impossible. It's not war. It's extermination by manufacturing." He wasn't wrong. American military protocol in World War II emphasized overwhelming material superiority. The P-47 Thunderbolt was the perfect expression of that protocol. Not the most elegant aircraft, not the most maneuverable, not the fastest, but absolutely unstoppable when deployed in the numbers America could produce. Let me give you one more example of the P-47's psychological impact. September 2nd, 1944, near Mons, Belgium, a German armored column attempting to retreat from France ran into a formation of 36 P-47 Thunderbolts from the 362nd Fighter Group. The German column consisted of approximately 70 vehicles, a mix of tanks, half-tracks, trucks, and staff cars. They were moving in daylight because they had no choice. The Americans were advancing so fast that nighttime movement wouldn't get them to safety fast enough. The P-47s attacked at 2:15 p.m. By 2:27 p.m., The entire column was destroyed. 12 minutes, 70 vehicles. But here's the remarkable part. American pilots reported that many of the German vehicles were already abandoned when they made their first attack run. The crews had heard the aircraft engines and fled into the surrounding forest before the shooting even started. The P-47 Thunderbolt had become so feared that the mere sound of its approach caused trained soldiers to abandon their equipment and run. Post-war analysis by U.S. Army historians concluded that between 30% and 40% of German vehicles destroyed by air attack in France were abandoned by their crews before they sustained any damage. The psychological warfare element had become more effective than the actual weapons. This represents something unprecedented in military history. Weapons have always inspired fear, but the P-47 Thunderbolt created a level of psychological trauma that made the enemy unable to function. Even before combat began, modern military psychology calls this preemptive learned helplessness. The enemy becomes so convinced of inevitable defeat that they don't even attempt resistance. That's the real legacy of the P-47 Thunderbolt. The P-47 Thunderbolt's impact extended far beyond World War II. Modern close air support protocol, the A-10 Warthog, Apache helicopters, AC-130 gunships, all trace their lineage directly to the P-47's success in 1944. The concept of armed reconnaissance, aircraft actively hunting enemy forces behind the front lines, became standard operating procedure for every military on Earth. The psychological warfare element was codified into NATO protocol in the 1950s. Military planners realized that the mere presence of capable air support affected enemy behavior, even when attacks didn't occur. Soviet and Chinese military protocol after World War II emphasized integrated air defense. Precisely because of the P-47's devastation of German armor, every modern military developed surface-to-air missiles, radar-guided anti-aircraft systems, and fighter interceptors, specifically to prevent an enemy from achieving the air supremacy that America demonstrated in 1944. The P-47 Thunderbolt didn't just win battles, it forced every military in the world to fundamentally rethink how wars would be fought. Let me take you back to that Tiger tank one final time. June 17, 1944, 9:43 a.m. Klaus Richter sits in the driver's seat. His commander is screaming into the radio, "Send help immediately!" In the 2 minutes of life he has remaining, does Richter understand what's happening? Does he realize that no dice? That no one can save them? Or does he still believe, even as the P-47s roll into their attack dive, that somehow, impossibly, German reinforcements will arrive? We'll never know. What we do know is this. The radio transmission that Tiger 231 was desperately calling for, the help they needed, never came. Not because German headquarters didn't want to help, not because they didn't care about those men, but because by June 17, 1944, the Wehrmacht had lost the ability to defend its soldiers from American air power. The German military had been built on principles of tactical excellence, technological superiority, and operational flexibility. They had conquered most of Europe using those principles, but in the skies over Normandy, they encountered something they couldn't adapt to, couldn't overcome, couldn't survive. 2,000 P-47 Thunderbolts with complete air superiority, and pilots trained to hunt tanks like predators hunting prey. Between June 1944 and May 1945, P-47 Thunderbolts destroyed over 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. They flew over 546,000 combat sorties. They dropped over 132,000 tons of bombs. They fired over 135 million rounds of .50 caliber ammunition. But the numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is in those 2,300 intercepted radio transmissions, those desperate calls for help, those young voices screaming, P-47 Thunderbolts everywhere, send help. The real story is German tank crews who abandoned their vehicles before attacks began, commanders who refused orders. An entire military protocol that collapsed under psychological pressure. The real story is Klaus Richter and Werner Schulz and Hans Müller and thousands of others who learned that courage, training, and determination meant nothing when facing an enemy with absolute control of the sky. The P-47 Thunderbolt didn't just destroy German tanks. It destroyed the German armored forces' will to fight, and that's why it remains, to this day, one of the most devastating weapons in military history. The last thing Klaus Richter heard was the sound of his commander's voice on the radio. Send help immediately. The very last thing he felt was the impact of those 50 caliber bullets slamming into the Tiger's armor at 56 rounds per second. The last thing he knew was that no dice, no help was coming at all. Because in June of '44, there was absolutely no defense against the P-47 Thunderbolt. There was only survival or death. And for Tiger 231, just like thousands of other German armored vehicles that summer, death arrived at 400 miles per hour, delivered by 8 machine guns and 24 pounds of high explosive. 90 seconds, that's all it took to utterly destroy 6 Tiger tanks and erase their crews. 90 seconds. That effectively signaled the end of German armored warfare effectiveness on the entire Western Front. 90 seconds that etched themselves into military history forever. Because after June 17, 1944, every German tank crew knew the truth when you heard that sound, that deep thunder of those Pratt & Whitney engines. Humming menacingly at 8,000 feet, you had 2 choices, run or die. There simply was no third option. And that is the enduring legacy of the P-47 Thunderbolt. Not simply the most produced American fighter aircraft of World War II, not just a highly effective ground attack platform, not merely a technological achievement, but a weapon so utterly devastating that it broke the enemy's mind, even before it broke their equipment. That's true air supremacy. That's what ultimately won the war.